Hey guys, welcome to another endgame video by the Go and Chess Trio. This is Nandhini. Today we're going to have a look at a position, a defense known as the Kling and Horwitz, and it is not very well known to a lot of players. And I have seen a lot of amateur players lose such positions a lot of times. So let's get started. Once again, a Philidor kind of position, but black is unable to achieve the Philidor. The position is similar to what we saw in the last video, but this time the rook is on the first rank, the black rook. And this position, white to play and black to play, it is a draw, but black to play, it's a way simpler draw because if you have seen the last video, you'll know that rook b6 leads to a simple draw for black, but it's not always that we get a perfect draw position in our game. So we're going to have a look at what happens if it is white to play here. And white's best continuation is definitely king g6 and not king f6, because here black simply has rook b6 and after king g5 is controlling the 6th rank, and it's a draw as we already know. So instead of king f6, king g6 is his best try. After which black has a variety of options. Let's have a look at each one of them. Now, if black plays the move rook b6, this leads to a loss, and rook b8 also leads to a loss. Rook b8 is too passive, and we have seen both these continuations in our last video. So if you haven't checked it out, please do check it out. And what about other black moves over here? The best moves for black over here are actually rook f1 and rook g1. Both these moves lead to a draw. But let's first just check out what is white's idea with king g6. So basically, let's just make a move for black, rook c1. And white's planning to play rook a8 check. And after king e7, f6 check, king e6, rook e8 check, and king d7, he just plays f7 and he's queening the pawn, because black can't even get perpetual checks, because one way to avoid them is white can simply play king h5, rook h1, king g4, just come zigzag, and he reaches the rook and white is queening his pawn. So this was white's idea with king g6. So the moves rook f1 and rook g1 are the easiest actually to stop white from winning. So, but you're going to stick with rook f1 in this video because this is the Kling and Horwitz method. So after rook f1, white can definitely play the move rook a8 check, but black has king e7. Again, he stops the pawn from pushing forward, and rook a7, there's king f8. So it's pretty obvious white cannot play f6 here because of rook g1, and it's going to lead to a perpetual check. We have seen this in the last video. So after rook f1, white's best try will be king f6, having a simple checkmate threat of rook a8. And there are only three ways to defend from this checkmate threat. One is rook e1, but here the pawn in game is just lost after rook a8, rook e8, rook into e8, king into e8, king g7, and the pawn just queens. So rook e1 is out of question. Now there are just two ways left, two moves left. So black has king e8 and king g8 as options, and one of them loses while one of them draws the game. An important thing to keep in mind is in Rook Endgames, always take your king to the short side. That's usually the best way to get the best result possible. So in this position, the short side will be this side, because white has a pawn on the f5 square, which means this is a short side counting the number of squares, and this is the long side. But let's just have a look at what happens if black makes the mistake of playing king e8, because if we are white in such positions in our games, we got to know how do we win such positions if our opponents do make mistakes. So after king e8, white can play rook a8 check, and after king d7, white has the very nice move rook f8 with the idea of king g7 next, and black can't really do anything to stop him, because let's say he just plays rook f2, white goes king g7, and after rook g2 check, king f7, and now this leads to a Lucena position, and we will be doing this in the next video, so do keep yourself updated with our channel. So this is lost for black. So the only option black has in this position is going to the short side with king g8. This leads to a draw because after rook a8 check, he has king h7. And now you may ask, okay, what if white plays rook f8 here? Isn't this still winning for white because he has a king e7 idea? Well, this isn't winning because now the black king has gone to the short side, which means he has left the long side for his rook. So now the minute the rook comes to f8, having the idea of king e7, you can just go to the long side, rook a1, having a threat of rook a6, and you're planning to give perpetual checks. So white's only try over here is rook e8, because if he plays rook f7 check, you can just play king g8 and you got a king back in front. So it hasn't really changed the position much since the beginning. So after rook a1, he can play rook e8. Now he's planning to block the checks, and here, yes, after rook a6 check, this is still a draw, but this method is a lot more difficult. We will be covering it up in our future videos. We're just going to stick with the simple Kling and Horwitz method, so that is back to rook f1. So what is the Kling and Horwitz method? Basically, you keep your rook behind the pawn. That's really important here. So here white can try king e6, but for king e6, black will just play king g7 and stop white from advancing his pawn. And if rook e7 check king f8, and again, there's hardly any change to the position since we started it. So the other option white has is, instead of king e6, he can try to play the move rook e5, now with the idea of king e7 and pushing f6, f7 after that. So now black, we know what white is planning. First thing, we see that the rook is no longer controlling the 8th rank. We can just get back king g8, get back to the 8th rank. And after white plays a move like king e7, we can go king g7. Again, control the important f6 square, not allowing the f5 pawn to move forward. And if white plays a move like king e6, supporting the pawn probably to free his rook, black can simply wait with rook f2 and he will get a draw here. Or he could also now go to the long side, since he sees that the rook is no longer there to block the check. So you can play rook a1, and after f6 check, king f8. Again, you have checks on the long side, but if not, you always have checks from the rear. So this is always a draw. So this is the Kling and Horwitz method. Basically, you got to keep your rook behind the pawn and keep your king at the right square. Do not allow the pawn to advance. So basically, another important thing to note down is you always move your king to the short side of the board, because you got to keep the long side for your rooks so that the rook has enough space to give checks. Because if you take your rook to the short side, it doesn't really make sense when there are just two files left. The king is just going to catch the rook and you wouldn't be able to give perpetual checks. So if you have any doubts in this video, you can comment in the comment section below. You can ask your questions in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. I hope you're home and safe. And yes, the best way to fight the current pandemic of the coronavirus is by staying home.